recording. Where's my volume monitor? There we go. It is recording on the mic. Okay, so it's going good. All right, so I did finish grading the exam for this class and also the previous one. The previous class I got 8 A's, about half the class getting B's, half the class getting C's, and then the rest getting D's. So, I would say that's a pretty decent distribution. For this class, it's not as good, even though I dropped the lowest score already. So what you see as in your grade book is after dropping the lowest question, the question with the lowest score is dropped already, and your current score is reflecting that. I cannot drop 2. Okay, dropping 2 out of 4 questions is not a good thing to do.
So had you not planned on dropping the lowest until after the averages came in, or?
I kept the setting from the previous semester. Apparently, I had to drop
Right.
the lowest score question also in the previous semester. So, all right. But that's kind of where we are at this point with this class. We are now back to dealing with the stack. Okay, and I cannot remember where we left off before the break. Have we talked about call and return, or have we just only talked about push and pop?
I think just push and pop.
I should probably watch my own video to find out. Well, let's do that.
We have the technology.
We got the technology.
We can rebuild this lecture. If we do this, quickly enough, we can make this lecture, stronger, faster in terms of the message. Built to last longer.
Does this mean your lecture videos are recursive at this point?
Well, there are always some recurring elements. Okay, so get all the way to the end. Oh yeah, we talked about all the cool stuff.
Kind of interesting. I have one of those Arduino boards.
Yep.
Played with it a little bit.
And we did talk about the stack. Okay, I just need to know what was the last instruction. So we only talked about push and pop. I think this is the last actual topic that we talked about. Okay, that's all right.
We've already gone over conditional push and pops as well.
Conditional?
Yeah.
I don't think we have any conditional.
Like it
Push and pops.
for flags.
For flags, yes. And I said that we are not going to use those much anyway. I think. All right, so the next one is call and return, and I have not fixed those yet. Okay. I'll go ahead and fix this one first. It's just changing server, but appearance is automatic. Display, there we go. Okay, so now we can talk about calling and returning. But before we do that, I want to go back and push and pop, but this time without using push and pop. What? Well, you heard it right. I'm going to talk about how to do push and pop without using the instructions push and pop. Okay? But before we do that, let's see if we can express push and pop in pseudo C instructions, or in pseudo C representation. All right. And I'm going to do it in my notepad to see if you guys still remember what is a push and what is a pop. Okay, so we'll go take a look at a very specific instruction, which is push $L $%EAX. Okay, what does that instruction do? How many people still vaguely remember what is what? Okay, first of all, what is a stack? What is the ordering of storing and retrieving items when you're dealing with a stack instead of a queue?
Last in, last out.
Last in,
Or first out.
first out. Okay, very good. Last in, first out is the nature of a stack, which means the very last item you put into it is the first item that you retrieve. In that case, what is this instruction going to do? There's one register that is getting affected by this instruction, but it's not here. It doesn't show here. It is an implied register that is being used. Which register are we talking about?
Stack pointer.
The stack pointer, ESP, exactly. Okay, so ESP is the name of the stack pointer. It is used in this instruction, except it is not explicitly stated, because whenever we manipulate or do something with the stack pointer is always involved. So, does anyone remember what push L EAX is actually going to do in terms of operations related to the stack pointer? The stack pointer always points to the last item, the last byte of the last item that we pushed. Okay? Which means if there are other things on the stack before this instruction, the stack pointer would be pointing to that thing prior to the execution of this instruction. But after the execution of this instruction, it will now be pointing to the value of EAX that is now stored on the stack. Is that okay? All right? Does the stack grow up? In other words, as I push more items on the stack, does the stack pointer move to a higher location, point to the higher location, or does it point to a lower location? Lower location, very good. Okay, so now that we know all of these things, let's see if we can express this as a quote-unquote pseudo-C statement. Okay, we know that we are storing something in memory. And whenever we store something into memory and the location is controlled by a register, we know it is dereferencing something. Okay, we don't know quite what this is, and it is getting what? What is providing the value to store on the stack? Well, the instruction kind of makes it kind of clear, right? Look, what am I storing on the stack?
Where is that?
Whatever is in EAX, very good. So EAX, or the value of EAX, is going to be the right-hand side of the assignment, because that is providing the value that we are storing. Where am I storing that? Remember the implicit register, the register that is not spelled out, but it's actually used? ESP, very good. All right, so we are almost there. In other words, we are almost done with this instruction, because now we know we are not storing EAX into the stack pointer itself. We are storing EAX to where the stack pointer is pointed to on the stack. In other words, we are storing it in memory, but the stack pointer is changed in the process. How is it changed in this process? Is it increased or is it decreased? Well, we just answered that question a little bit earlier. It's decreased, okay? So if it is decreased, we have two options. We can do this, or we can do this. So are we decreasing the stack pointer before we store, or are we decreasing the stack pointer after we store?
Before.
Before is correct, because the stack pointer is currently pointing to the last item that was pushed on the stack. So if I decrease after, that means I'm overwriting the last item that I pushed on the stack, which is not a good thing. So that means this has to be a pre-decrement, like that. Now, just to be sure that we know the ordering of the operation, that's the best way to do it, okay? Auto pre-decrement the stack pointer, and then use the value post-decrement to point to the location that will actually store EAX. Is that okay? All right. Can we do this without the push out instruction? Can we do something like this using instructions that we already know prior to the push out instruction? I think so. Okay, so let's see how we can do this. All right. When you look at this statement in C or C++, okay, you take your pick. What is the first thing that we need to do? Well, usually we evaluate the right-hand side, but this time the right-hand side is pretty easy, so there's nothing to evaluate in the right-hand side. But as far as the left-hand side is concerned, what is the first thing we need to do? We do the decrement first, right? So when you look at this single instruction or single statement in C++, the first thing we do is to decrement the stack pointer. Then the second thing we do is to store EAX to where the stack pointer points to. Is that okay? Yeah, go ahead.
Like, when it's decrementing, like, does it like go down like 1 byte, or does it go down like as many bytes as like the?
That's a very good point. I'm so glad that you brought it up, because stack pointer has no type associated with it. Okay? So when I borrow the concept from C and C++, where pointers do have types, it doesn't match that well. Okay? So what I do need to do here is to indicate, okay, what kind of a pointer is ESP? Now, because EAX is 32-bit, and we want to make ESP a 32-bit pointer, so if you really want to do it in a safe way, it is better to cast ESP to an integer pointer first. So in this case, I would also have to cast it to an integer pointer, and cast it to an integer pointer. Because this way, when you decrement an integer pointer, the pointer is not changing by 1 byte position, it is changing by 4 byte positions. Okay. Are there any questions about casting a pointer before you use it as a pointer? Yes? No? Does everybody understand the difference between doing this as opposed to doing this? Because if I cast it as a char pointer, it will only change by 1 byte position. If I cast it as an integer pointer, and I'm saying, point to the previous integer, it would change by 4 byte positions. So that's why, casting the pointer first is the proper thing to do to reflect what we are actually trying to do in assembly. Okay, so now that we know this is what we need to do in pseudo-C notation, what do we do to do this one in actual assembly instruction? How do we decrease the stack pointer so now it points to 4 positions before the current one? An address is just an integer, so how do you make, how do you find the address that is 4 bytes before another address? Subtraction, very good. Subtract long. What are we subtracting from what else? Well, we know subtraction has 2 components, right? I know this one is the one thing that is being changed. What am I changing? ESP, very good. So we have %ESP here. And how much are we trying to change it? 4? Would that be it?
No.
No. We need the $sign, because without the $sign, we are going to location 4 and find out what is at location 4 and subtract that amount from ESP, which is not what we want. We want to subtract exactly 4 from ESP. So that would deal with the first statement. What about the second one? In other words, with this one, in pseudo-C notation, in assembly code, what do we do to do this? Okay, we have a move long instruction. What is providing the bit pattern to move, to copy from? EAX, and where are we copying this to? ESP, like that? Parentheses, very good, because in parentheses, it is a different addressing mode. It is called indirect, which means I am only using ESP as a pointer, and I'm storing the content of EAX to the memory location pointed to by ESP. So these 2 instructions together is doing push L EAX. Are we doing okay so far with these 2 instructions? Yes? No?
So
Can I? Yep, go ahead.
Copy what's that? EAX to ESP.
To where ESP points to.
4 bytes before the end.
It's whatever ESP points to. So from at this point, with the second instruction, it's just saying, okay, I'm treating the 32 bits of ESP as an address, and I'm going to store EAX at that particular location. The decrement already occurred, so I know these 4 locations should be free on the stack. Yeah. Any other questions about these 2 instructions? What about pop L? do you think we can do pop L using instructions other than pop L itself? So if I say pop L into EDX, how do we express this in the pseudo C notation? Okay, what is the effect of pop L EDX? What does it do? Okay, it's going to copy a value from the stack into EDX, register EDX. Okay, but where am I copying from on the stack? The stack is in memory, so where am I copying from? Okay, but who's going to give me the address to copy from? ESP, the stack pointer. That's why it's called the stack pointer, because it points to the very last thing that I push on the stack.
So you can't choose which part of the stack you want to read.
Well, later on we can see that we can actually choose which part of the stack we're copying from, but at this point, the push and pop instructions only deal with the last thing that we push.
So it's like what goes in first, goes out last?
Yes,
That's what you're saying?
we're strictly following the last in, first out order. All right, so in C and C++ notation, how do we express this? We know EDX is the one getting the value, so it is on the left-hand side. What is the right-hand side? Well, we know ESP is involved, but we know that we are not copying from the stack pointer itself into EDX because we need some kind of dereference. The stack pointer is only used as an address to let us know where on the stack we're copying from. So we know there's a dereference somewhere, okay? But we also know that the pop out instruction changes ESP as a result. How does pop out change ESP?
It's going to point somewhere else.
It's going to point somewhere else, but where is that somewhere else relative to what it used to be pointing to? 4 bytes. So is it 4 bytes before or 4 bytes after?
After.
4 bytes after, because when we shrink the stack, it is going up. Okay, the pointer is going up. Okay, so we know there's an auto increment involved somewhere. So it's either a pre-increment or it is a post-increment. So now the question is, am I increasing the stack pointer after I get the content and copy that to EDX, or am I incrementing it after? After is correct, because the stack pointer is already pointing to the thing that I want to copy. So I better copy first and then increment later. So it is a post increment like that. And if I want to emphasize the ordering of operation and which thing gets done first, this is the right way to do it. Yep, question?
So it's going to retrieve from this location, and once it gets that, it's going to go up. That's where you have the
Yep.
posting.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So just to get the type right, because EDX is a 32-bit wide register, so that means ESP should be treated as a pointer to a 32-bit item and not a 8-bit item. Okay, so if this is what we need to do, can we separate it into 2 steps? The first step is going to be what? Or maybe just that, right? The first step is really just, okay, look at ESP as an integer or 32-bit pointer and retrieve those 32 bits, store that into EDX. That's my first step, okay? Because remember, this is a post increment, so I'm not going to do any increment in the first step. The second step is dealing with just the increment itself, which is basically saying well, it doesn't really matter whether it's a post or pre, but I'm just going to do it this way. So cast first and then do the increment, just to be sure that when we do get to the increment, it is already a 32-bit pointer. Or points to 32-bit thing. Is that okay? What about assembly instructions? How do we do this in assembly instructions? It's almost exactly the opposite in multiple ways compared to the push instruction. How do we get this done first? Which instruction should we use? We're just copying, so move L, you would do it. And what is providing the source material? What am I copying from? Whatever ESP is pointing to, not ESP itself. So that means I need to use parentheses around ESP to make this a indirect operand, which means this is not copying ESP, it is copying what ESP is pointing to in memory.
So that ESP is just a pointer?
Yeah,
Just a pointer.
it is a pointer. When you use parentheses around the register, you are basically saying I'm not copying the register itself, I'm copying what the register is pointing to.
The content.
The content that it points to in memory. And what is the destination? That's an easy one. EDX. Yep, that's it. And then the second instruction, which is just bumping up the pointer so it points to the next item. How do we do this in assembly code?
Add L.
Add L, okay, add long. And what am I adding to what else? I'm adding the constant 4 to ESP without the parentheses, because this time I am actually changing the register and not changing what the register is pointing to. Okay, so just take a look at this and make sure that we get all of these items. Are there any questions about what is on the projector at this point? No questions? Well, I have a question. If we can do push and pop without using push and pop, why do we have push and pop?
Automation? Automation?
Automation?
So like that's fast, you don't have to do all the process myself.
Because the Intel architecture, the i386 architecture is a Sisk. And Sisk stands for, CISC stands for Complex Instruction Set Computer. Okay? That's why we have instructions to do this. Okay? So even though we could have just used 2 instructions to do exactly the same thing as 1 instruction, the Intel instruction set allows us to do something like this because it is called a Sisk architecture. So that means with a Risc architecture, what is going to be true? Or generally speaking, what is going to be true with a Risc architecture? RISC stands for Reduced Instruction Set Computer. So
Why am I going to have a push that?
exactly. So with a Risc architecture, they don't give you the push L instruction. They don't give you the pop L instruction. If you want to push something on the stack, you use the subtract and the move instruction. If you want to pop something from the stack, you use the move and then the add L instruction. Yep.
So is it kind of like the more, I would say, not harder, but you have to do it yourself, kind of.
Okay, do what myself?
Well, you know, like that.
Writing code in assembly?
So yes, essentially you can push. You have to do
2 instructions. Yeah. You can have macros. You know, a macro in an assembler is basically just saying, okay, if I just use this name, it means the following instructions. So you can, just replace, a instruction with a macro and accomplish exactly the same thing. So from the source code perspective, it's a shorthand. I can just use a shorthand and accomplish exactly the same thing. So now the question is, why do we have Sisk versus Risc architectures? Have I ever explained that in this class? No? Okay, well it's a very important thing, okay? It's a very important thing to explain because I think Sisk is going away. Okay, Sisk architectures are going away pretty soon. They're only kept alive because of Microsoft. Okay, so we'll go take a look at a scenario. Okay, I think most of you will like this particular scenario, or at least talk about it. So let's say you have a LAN party. Do you guys do LAN parties anymore? Because
Yes.
these days.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Yes.
LAN
Okay.
parties.
So we're gonna do a LAN party, and somebody is gonna
Yeah.
house the LAN party, and we will have all the gamers, using a particular room, to do this particular, game. We'll have a pretty good sized room too. So I would say 20 feet by 20 feet. It's a pretty good sized room.
Preferably
okay?
with good ventilation. It's gonna get hot.
We'll deal with that later. we have a pretty good sized room, 20 feet by 20 feet, and
20
we'll
feet.
arrange tables around the whole thing. So we have a door here, and then we have wrapped around table like that. Okay.
Great.
So yep, go ahead.
That's great.
So how much space do you need per gamer, like width-wise? 3 feet or so? 3, 4, maybe 4, okay? So we can have, there's a door here, I cannot use that space. So we can have, 4, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, but I cannot use the corner space here. So what we can have 1, 2, 3, and then maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3 again, 1, 2, 3. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We can have up to 13 people, doing, game in the same room. Does that sound about right to you? A 400 square foot room, dedicated to gaming, having about 13 people inside, doable?
That may be more smelly.
We'll get to that later. So we can technically fit 13 people in with their gaming computer and stuff. Is that right? Okay. What is the power consumption of a gaming computer? Now we are not talking about one of those wimpy computers that you just buy from a store. We are talking about something that you build for gaming
Love
purposes.
and care.
At least 600. Mine personally has 1,000.
1,000? Okay, so 1,000 watt power supply for each one because you need it, right?
It doesn't necessarily mean they're using the 1,000, the whole 1,000.
Oh.
Those are some really good
Are
graphics on
you
this LAN party
sure?
we're running.
Okay,
So
so
there's a
if there's a
probability question right there.
disagreement, we go to Newegg and do some research. Okay, so we are
Combine that one
looking
with
into
800.
computer systems and components, actually. We're looking into components. We're looking into graphics cards. Okay, so we're looking into graphics cards, video cards, desktop.
980.
Oh.
Sorry. Okay, we'll sort by price. Highest price first because,
It's based off
if you
the
pay more, it
highest.
tends to be better, right?
10.
Okay, so we'll pick up this one.
Oh, yeah.
This is why I like window shopping. Okay, so where does it tell you about the power consumption? There has to be in specifications, I would assume. And moving on. Okay. Doesn't tell you about the power consumption. I can't believe that.
PG&E will tell you.
No, your breaker will tell you. Okay, they tell you about the performance, but it doesn't tell you anything about power consumption. Okay.
Wikipedia?
Okay. So what is the chipset? It's a 980 Ti. Okay, so 980 Ti power consumption. Okay, there we go. This must have the power consumption. Okay, there we go. 250 watts. Okay, I know you guys cannot see it that quickly. Right here. Okay. So we are talking about 250 watts per card. And how many cards can you fit into one modern motherboard?
4-way SLI.
Is that really possible?
Yes.
One motherboard having 4 video cards?
I know there's 3-way, but I'm not sure.
I know
about
3 for
4-way.
sure, but 4 may be pushing it. So let's say 3, right? 3 times 250 watts, just for the graphics cards, right? What about the processor? You have the highest end hexa-core i7 processor. That's about, what, 150 watts or so? Guess. Okay, let's find out. Okay, this is engineering. Okay, this is engineering. You're looking into components, and you have a specific thing that you're building. Okay, so we are moving to components again. Go to processors, and we're looking into desktop processors. And sort by price, because the more expensive has to be the better.
Roll up, Tom.
$12?
That'd be a nice.
Scroll over. Whoa.
Absolutely ridiculous.
I don't know what that is.
That's someone smoking crack.
I believe for
Let's go
Intel,
first.
it's the 5960X. That would be their top of the line.
Okay. So
Somebody actually put an extra digit in that first
these are
one.
okay. 5960X. This one.
Yep.
All right. Let's click it
Three gig.
and find out what is the thermal specification, because most of the energy is wasted as heat. This one has 8 cores, so I stand corrected. I said hexa-core. This is octa-core, and the power consumption is 140.
And of course, you're going to need a liquid cooling system that.
Or you can have the whole thing in oil, fish tank, oil, and yeah.
That comes with issues.
That comes with its own issues. But if you have Bluetooth mice and Bluetooth mouse and Bluetooth keyboard, then you won't have the oil creeping up the cable anymore. Which is usually the first problem that people notice. Is like, hey, your mouse is greasy. Because oil has a very strong tendency to kind of creep up. Okay, so we are looking at this much power just for the graphics card and the processor. And the other one is going to be your RAID setup, because you don't want to lose any data when you're playing games and you want the highest performance. So we want to have like 5 hard drives. And each hard drive, I think, they're not too bad. I think they're only about 15 watts each. Yep.
Which kind of hard drive? Solid state?
No, these are
SATA.
these are the highest spin rate is at 10,000 RPM. So these are the 10,000 RPM high-end hard drives. But you want 5 because you want to have a RAID 5 setup, so you have redundancy, and you have 1 as a hot spare. So in case anything goes down, you don't have to terminate your game right away, go to Fry's and buy a replacement drive, because you can use the hot spot. You can use the hot spare right away and have everything to self-repair, right? Okay, so that's about 75 watts. So when you combine these two, I would just call it another 250 watts, because the motherboard has other chipsets, memory and stuff like that. So I can kind of just guesstimate and call this another 250 watts. So when you add up all of these things, you do have a 1 kilowatt system. And when you're doing heavy-duty gaming, it is going to consume 1 kilowatt. Okay. All right. So we have 13 of those computers, not even counting the monitors, right? And the people. So we have 13 times 1 kilowatt, which is easy. We have 13 kilowatt in terms of power consumption. Okay. This is you need multiple breakers to get this done, because one breaker can only handle how much watt, how many watts. One breaker, household breaker, is a 30 amp breaker. 30 amps time voltage is the power that you can handle. So we are dealing with approximately 3 kilowatts per breaker. So this room will need 3 individual breakers all by itself. Okay, but let's just say that you can hire an electrician to specially wire this room so that you won't have a breaker issue. Okay, but now we have 13 kilowatt, powering up the computers. What is that energy converting into? We cannot get rid of energy, right? If the computers are consuming 13 kilowatt of power in electrical form, it's not going into nothing. Okay, there's preservation of energy. What do you think that energy is converting into? That massive computation power, right? No, not really. It's converting into heat. All right, so you have 13 kilowatts converting into heat. How much heat are we talking about here? What is 13 kilowatt? What is a hair dryer? How much power does one hair dryer consume? Ish. Okay, that's one hair dryer. You basically have the equivalence of 10 hair dryer turning on at the same time the whole time when you're playing video games.
It's hot.
Okay. What do you think is going to be the first problem with this setup?
No windows.
It's going to heat up what? Heat is going to be the problem. Okay, because you cannot dissipate 13 kilowatts of heat that easily. Portable heaters. What is the power rating of a typical portable heater?
About 18, is it?
Yep, about 18, because of the breaker issue, right? So this is equivalent to having not quite 10, we'll call it 7. So you have 7 electric heater at full blast in this room. So heat extraction is the main issue. You cannot get rid of the heat quickly enough. And this is a minor problem because what other type of situation where you put a lot of high power computers into a very small confined space?
Catch on fire.
Go ahead.
Just catch on fire.
No. But what is the what other situations would you end up with the same issues when you try to pack a lot of high power computers into a small space?
Data centers. Data centers.
Data centers, yes. Okay, so data centers have exactly the same issue. If you ask Google and say, okay, what is the limiting factor that you cannot put any more processing power into your facility? It is not because there are not enough computers, there's not enough space to put computers, it's because they cannot extract heat fast enough. Is that okay? In other words, in this situation, and also in the situation of a data center, the limiting factor is not space. It's not do we have the space to put more computers in, it is how much heat can you extract. That is the limiting factor. But what does that have anything to do with Risc architecture versus Sisk architecture?
Risc architecture is simpler, and so it generates less heat to do the.
But it needs more instructions. If you go back to the previous slide, we need 2 instructions as a Risc architecture to do what 1 instruction can do in a Sisk architecture.
It does it anyways, doesn't it?
Internally, it does it anyway. Correct.
The Risc is more flexible.
In a way.
It's like the difference between C# and C++ programming languages.
So what we are looking at here is not the raw processing power. The raw processing power is typically measured in not flops, because that's floating point, it's MIPS. There we go. So we are looking at MIPS per processor or per core. People used to focus on this a lot, okay, which is million, or these days you can call billion, okay? So you can have BIPS per core, which is billion instructions per second per core. People used to fixate on this number, and all the new processors, Intel, all the other manufacturers focus on this, and they say, oh, look at this new processor. We can execute more instructions per second per core than any other alternatives. That's used to be the focus. But these days, that is no longer the focus, because we know that heat is the limiting factor. So when heat becomes the limiting factor, this is no longer useful. We don't care about this anymore. What we do care these days is another unit. It is called billion instructions, okay? Same thing, not per second anymore. What is the measurement of energy?
Joule.
Joules. Joule. Joule.
Oh, it's saying like how efficient it is.
It is how efficient, exactly. Yeah. So we are looking at the number of instructions that we can execute, but not per core or per second. We're looking at per energy unit, okay, which is efficiency. As it turns out, Risc architectures are far more efficient compared to Sisk architectures. Okay, and I'll explain why that is the case later on. But this is what they're focusing on, and they found that Risc architectures, even though each one cannot really do as much, and you need multiple instructions to do one instruction of a Sisk architecture, they still end up doing more processing, more computation on a per energy unit basis. And that's why all data centers do not use Sisk architectures anymore. They all switch to use Risc architectures. It is the same reason why your phone is not using an i7 processor. What kind of processor does your phone use?
I think Wacom or something.
A Snapdragon-ish kind of processor, but they're all based on a particular architecture, which is ARM. ARM. Okay. The ARM architecture is the most popular Risc architecture currently in the market. Okay. All right. So we want to find out why that is the case, because just knowing that Sisk architectures have a lower energy efficiency compared to Risc architecture, well, that's cool, but why is that the case? What do you guys think?
You can't give.
If heat's not the mitigating factor as much anymore, then like you technically could stack more cores.
Well, there are two issues with efficiency when it comes to Risc versus Sisk. The first one is not so much efficiency, but it has to do with yield. Okay? Can someone tell me what is yield in the context of semiconductor production? Or just in general, what is yield?
What you get.
What you get out of what you put into the system, right? Okay. So when you manufacture semiconductors, you use wafers, which is basically a slice of semiconductor material. Okay, and they are a fixed size. I think the current size is 30 centimeters across, as a diameter. Okay, with a smaller core, okay, with a Risc architecture, there are fewer transistors, and as a result, each core is smaller in terms of surface area. So that means with a Sisk architecture, you can have more chips out of one wafer. Okay, I'm just using this as an example. Okay, this is the Risc situation. With a Sisk situation, each core is bigger, so you don't get as many processors per wafer. But this has nothing to do with yield. Okay, you can have 100% yield here, which means every single chip that you make out of this wafer is usable, none has any defect. And you can have 100% yield of a Sisk also, where none of these processor core has any defects, and you get 100% yield. That is not the issue. But things are not perfect. Okay, out of one wafer, something is going to happen at some point, so some of these things will go bad. So I'm going to use, well, if I have another color, I can use another color for this, but if I don't, it will still be okay. So let's just say that we have, a few random spots where we have defects, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, when you look at the number of chips I have to throw away because of the defects, which one has a higher yield? The Risc architecture has a higher yield. Because when you look at the 5 chips that I have to throw away, how many chips am I getting out of the entire thing? Lots. And I'm still only throwing away 5 because of defects. I'm also throwing away 5 because of defects when we have a larger core, but what is the total number of chips that I'm getting out of this wafer? Not nearly as many, right? So that's why when you're looking at production yield, a Risc architecture always has a higher yield compared to a Sisk architecture, because a Sisk architecture takes more silicon. Is that okay? All right, okay. But what about the efficiency? I mean, the whole point of a Sisk architecture is one instruction can do a lot more compared to a Risc architecture. So why would a Risc architecture be more energy efficient? Now, if something is more energy efficient in semiconductor, that means certain transistors of a Sisk architecture is not doing anything useful. And why is that the case? Okay. Remember the music box thing? No?
Yeah.
Too long ago. Okay, so let's take a look at the music box again. And and I don't need to know which one because they're all about the same for this particular discussion. So text processor, oh, V2. Here we go. All right, so we go back to the kind of this thing, which is lacking the music box itself, okay? And let me shrink the design because we don't really need to look at the details. We just need to look at the overall design here. With a Sisk architecture, it means more things need to be coordinated, right? So when you look at a Sisk architecture versus a Risc architecture, which one is going to have more components or bigger components? The Sisk architecture, right? The only part that does the actual computation is which part? Out of this whole picture, which one part is the one part that does all the adding, subtracting, comparing? The ALU. Everything else is really just to support it, okay? So when you have to spend a lot of with transistors in all the muxes, all the other support transistors and stuff like that, that's all going to waste. They're not doing actual computation. They're really there just to support. So that's why with a Sisk architecture, where the mux get bigger because there are more things, more pathways, and more steps to do things, then your architecture gets bigger. And it becomes less energy efficient because now you have more transistors that really do not need to be there. Yep.
Plus, the fact is that if a transistor or if a silicon, if one is defective, it's not going to communicate well. It's not going to communicate at all because there is a certain path for that 0, 1 to go through to get somewhere. But if it's broken, it's broken. It's not going to work. It's not like it's going to reduce efficiency or increase efficiency with it.
Right. This is a yield issue, not an efficiency issue.
The yield?
Yeah. This is a yield issue, which is basically, if I put in if I spend X amount of money on one single wafer, how much of that money is wasted because of defects? And with a Risc architecture, you're only throwing away a small percentage because of the defects. With a Sisk architecture, you're going to throw away much more, as a result of defects. Because there's a larger area, but if any area within the entire core is damaged or has a defect, you have to throw away the entire core. So that's why the percentage waste is higher when you're dealing with a Sisk architecture as opposed to a Risc architecture. But in terms of energy efficiency, it has to do with, well, all that stuff still has to be done. Okay, if I go back to the 2 instructions that we're dealing with, not that one, okay. This one basically means, you are providing a single instruction to the processor. But the music box becomes much more complicated because in the end, these things, subtracting 4 from the stack pointer and moving a register into where another register is pointing to, it still has to be done. So that means this is now done not in your code, but in microcode using the music box. Your music box gets more complicated. But your music box is implemented in silicon. That silicon is inside the processor itself, and that's why it is less energy efficient because you're wasting the transistors of your processor to do what can also be done in your actual program. Is that making any sense? Sort of? Okay. But the difference apparently is actually pretty significant because otherwise, IBM is not going to switch all of their mainframes from Sisk architecture into Risc architectures. Okay. And for the same reason, your phone does not use a Sisk architecture. Because if you use a Sisk architecture in a cell phone where it is not energy efficient, what is the impact to use as an end user?
Phone doesn't last the whole day.
You only like it in the winter because it's going to be warm the whole time until it runs out of battery.
10 minutes.
Well, it's going to be a little more than 10 minutes, but it's definitely not going to last your entire day. The energy efficiency, you can probably look it up too. In fact, I am curious, so I'm going to look it up. energy efficiency Sisk versus Risc. I want a number. So we have some numbers here, but these are not actual the numbers that I want to look at. Oh, okay. They don't give us any actual number as far as I can see. I just kind of glanced through it. It just talk about the same thing that I just talked about, but without numbers. But you can probably find out the actual numbers if you read enough of these articles, but it's definitely enough to make a difference. What type of architecture do you think IBM is currently using in its mainframe computers?
Risc.
It's a Risc architecture. What is the name of that Risc architecture? It has its roots back in the days when IBM and Apple and Microsoft, they're all kind of cooperating. It starts with Power. PowerPC, that's right. The PowerPC architecture is currently used in IBM mainframe computers, which probably includes the implementation of Watson. Okay. Does anyone remember at Apple computers, Macs, used to have the same processor, the PowerPC processor? What drove Apple to ditch the PowerPC architecture and started to use the Intel architecture? Do you guys remember that day?
Software?
Nope, it was not actually software.
The customers? It's not that.
Okay, so Apple has been losing market share in the laptop computers back in those days because the PowerPC architecture was actually not energy efficient, despite being a Risc architecture. The reason has to do with IBM never really used the newer process, so they were using bigger transistors compared to Intel. And that also has an impact on energy efficiency. So as a result, the PowerPC architecture, the chips that Apple bought from IBM, they were not very energy efficient. And as a result, the laptop computers, the Apple laptop computers, were not as competitive as laptop computers using Intel processors. So Apple kept going back to IBM and saying, can you make these processors using smaller transistors and make them more energy efficient? And IBM at the time said, no, we're not going to do a single thing. So Apple eventually had to switch the processor architecture to make use of the more efficient Intel architecture at the time. But after that, IBM actually changed the process and actually make the PowerPC architecture a lot more energy efficient. Now, whether IBM was actually intentionally trying to ditch Apple or not, I don't know. There are certain speculation that IBM actually did not want to support Apple anymore, and that's why they held on to the old transistor technology long enough just to make Apple go away.
Fail, pretty much, don't you think?
No, Apple just said, we're not going to use the PowerPC architecture anymore, and they just went on and used the Intel architecture, which at the time was more energy efficient. But to support Apple is a liability from the perspective of IBM. So there are reasons why people can think, okay, maybe IBM was just trying to ditch Apple at the time and say, okay, we don't want to support Apple anymore. But these days, all IBM mainframes are PowerPC based. Which other item also use the PowerPC architecture? Which game console also use the PowerPC architecture? Not Xbox. Xbox is a Microsoft thing. They will never support the PowerPC architecture.
The Wii? Nintendo? Like a Wii?
No, the Wii did not use the PowerPC architecture either. This one, come on, you guys don't know about this one. The PlayStation 3. Okay, PlayStation 3 is the one that makes use of the PowerPC architecture. Okay, PowerPC. There we go. So the PowerPC architecture was also used in the Sony PlayStation 3. And the PlayStation 3 at the time when it was introduced was a very interesting architecture because it makes use of not one, not two, not three processors. How many processors do you think the PlayStation 3 has for processing? Nope. Nope. More.
12?
That's why they costed like $700 when they just came out.
That's probably partially why. So let's go look up a PlayStation. Okay, I'm trying to look for a link here. There we go. I think it has 16 cores where one is dedicated as the supervisor and then 15 are actually doing the computation. So let's take a look at number of cores. Probably look at the okay, CPU, 1 PPE, okay, I stand corrected, it's 7. So there are 8 cores in total. One is dedicated as the controller, and then the other 7 will do the actual processing. So at the time, this is really high end. The PlayStation 3 at the time when it was introduced was actually way superior to anything else at the time in terms of processing power. How do we know that? What does the PlayStation 3 have anything to do with the Air Force, the US Air Force?
They used to run their simulations on it.
Well, let's find out. Because I want to give you guys, these data points because I want you guys to remember, the importance of Risc architecture because, these are all results of, the Risc architecture being more energy efficient. So US Air Force PlayStation, and you will find multiple articles. Here we go. So this is their little server farm. Okay. So at the time, and let's check the time here, 2010, which is only about 6 years ago, 5.5. So about 5 years ago, the 33rd largest supercomputer in the world, which is nothing to sneeze at, okay? This is nothing to sneeze at, is the US Air Force Research Lab's newest system, which has a core made of 1,700 Sony PlayStation consoles. I don't see any reaction from you guys, but I am pretty impressed. Okay? Somebody actually had the idea of saying, hey, these boxes are only about $300 or $400 each, and even if we have to buy about 1,800 of these days, it's still a fraction of how much they have to pay to make a custom-built supercomputer. Okay? This is commercial parts. You just go to Walmart, you go to Best Buy, and you just, okay, don't even bother to take these things off the crate. We'll take the entire crate. Thank you very much.
So do you think that's why Sony switched to those AMD APU things?
Possibly, but this is telling you, what people are doing with supercomputing is they are making use of these high efficiency processors, and they're inexpensive also. Okay, but later on, something else happened, and you will find articles about that too. Collateral damage because of the PS3. It's because of a firmware update.
Oh, I remember that one.
You guys remember that one, right? Yeah. Yeah. Sony decided, I don't think I want to support, like third-party operating systems anymore. So they updated the firmware not to support third-party operating systems. Which, guess what? The US Air Force is using. So that update, actually impacted the Air Force because now they can no longer make use of their supercomputer.
That's very annoying.
It is very annoying, but this is the whole point. Dirt cheap computing. That is why the PS3 was used as the main building platform of the supercomputer. Okay.
Wait, so the government issues subsidies, and the PlayStations are cheaper because of the subsidies. So the government gives them a subsidy so they can proceed to buy a literal ton of Sony PlayStations, spending government money because they subsidize it with government money.
Apparently,
this is nonsense.
They're gonna pay someone to buy the supercomputer. The question is, who are they gonna pay to have the supercomputer built?
No wonder they were all sold out.
They probably had a bunch of people come together, and the team was like, "Hey,
yep,
we can put it together a supercomputer for 600,000.
Yep.
These other companies are saying $1 million."
And they just bought a bunch of PS3s, like.
One guy was like, "Wait a second, we can."
Now I don't know
together.
what happened after this. What happened after the update? What actually happened? I don't know about that one. you guys can
Don't
find out.
forget it.
Oh, the result. This is the result of the monster that they built. Is 500 teraflops, which is a lot of computation power. I mean, at the time, it was the 33rd most powerful computer in the world, and that's actually pretty impressive. And which operating system do you think they were using for the supercomputer? I think it may not be Linux. It could be BSD. Okay, let me search for the word Linux. Yep, there we go. So each one is using Linux. And there's a cluster version of Linux where the operating system can dynamically migrate processes from one processor to another processor. So that's yep. So there you have it. Sisk versus Risc architecture. And that brings us back to, where is it?
At least they weren't connected to PlayStation Network, so they didn't just lose all of that re-imaging.
Just don't update your cluster. It should be
But they
fine.
just cannot do any more firmware update. They basically have to stop the update from that point. So that brings us up to here, because the way I am teaching this class is I will teach you the usual Intel instruction, where it is kind of like a Sisk architecture type of thing. But I will also tell you how to do it in a Risc manner, okay? Because I think it is important to understand. Well, the Sisk instructions are handy to have when you write code by hand in assembly, but it is also possible to do it without using the Sisk instructions. Okay? So, which also means in your second exam, I will probably have questions, asking you, okay, these are the Sisk or these are the Risc instructions. Which fewer instructions in Sisk can be used to implement exactly the same thing? So you will have to understand both ways of doing things.
So the test like next week.
It's going to be maybe next 2 weeks or so.
Coming up.
Coming up. Yep. Coming attraction.
To a classroom near you.
Yep. All right. So are there any questions about this entire discussion? I know it sounds like a really big, huge digression, but you will see this stuff again when you get to a 4-year university and have to take their either upper division or computer architecture class or some other classes that talk about architecture. So this will come up again. Any questions? No questions?
So when you're talking about energy efficiency, basically the Risc, in a way, I guess how I would see it is it would use less clock cycles essentially than the Sisk
No,
architecture, or?
they just end up using, no, they might actually using more clock cycles. However, the total amount of energy, which is measured in joule, is less compared to the Sisk architecture. So if okay, let's say your objective is to do a fast Fourier transform of a particular waveform, okay? The Sisk architecture, typically may take, I'm just throwing out numbers here. Let's say 20 millijoules. The Risc architecture will be using 15 millijoules. Now, how much time is it going to take? That is not part of the equation, because certain algorithms can be parallelized, which means even though you can do it slower with only one Risc architecture, but if the problem can be divided into smaller chunks, then you can have 16 processors all doing it at the same time and shrink the time to 1/16 of what you would have used using only one processor. So the focus is on per joule, how much calculation can you do, and Risc has that edge. Is that kind of answering your question?
Yes, it does.
All right, cool. So are there any other questions related to Risc versus Sisk? If not, are there any questions related to push and pop? Yep, go ahead.
So it takes more power to do an instruction if you're using Sisk compared to Risc. Is that what you're trying to get at with this whole?
Generally speaking, yes. But the bottom line is not on a per instruction basis.
No,
The bottom line is on a per computational task basis. In other words, on a particular task, okay, here's a big, huge, spreadsheet. I change one cell. I want to recalculate the entire cell. how much energy is needed to do that recalculation. You use a Sisk box, it will take this much energy. You do the same thing on a Risc box, it will take a smaller amount of energy. Even the time is not important, okay? It might take the Cisc architecture only 0.5 seconds. It would take the Risc architecture 2 seconds to do it. I don't even care, because I can parallelize, and have more computers doing all different things at the same time. So I can still end up with more things being done with less energy. And that becomes important because of this scenario. We cannot extract heat fast enough from data centers. So what if I have a lot of super duper computers that can run really fast when I cannot put enough of those computers into the space because of heat extraction problems? So that's why this becomes a more important thing, which is the amount of computation that you can do on a per energy unit basis. Is that okay? All right. And that's also what is driving the cell phone industry. The cell phone industry is driving this number as well, because they want your cell phone to last longer on a daily basis. But there's a different equation when it comes to cell phones, because with cell phones, the processor is not what is chewing up your battery. What is chewing up your battery life when it comes to cell phones?
The screen.
The screen. But why is that the case? Why do you think the screen is actually consuming far more energy compared to the processor? What is so inefficient about the screen?
The light.
Right.
Is the light, okay, so why is it inefficient? Sorry? How many people have an OLED display on your cell phone?
I don't know.
Organic LED, is it more efficient or about the same? Compared to LCD?
I'm pretty sure, I don't know, I just know it's more clear. It's supposed to be more clear.
It's more vibrant.
Yeah.
Yeah, the colors are more vibrant. But the question is it more energy efficient? That one I don't know either. What is LCD technology? What does it stand for? LCD. Liquid crystal display. Okay? Sorry? Oh, okay. LED is light emitting diode, which is far more efficient. Okay, so we would like to have LEDs for display, but LCD phones or LCD displays are different. Okay, so this is the cross section of an LCD display. You have a light source, which is typically LED based. Okay, I don't even care what it is. Okay, so but you have basically a backlight source, and then you have polarization material, and then you have your actual liquid crystal display, which is basically crystal in suspension. When you apply a electrical potential across the two terminals, it will align the crystal, and it will align it one way or another way. So when you have one fixed layer doing the polarization this way horizontally, and you align this one to polarize vertically like this, then you see a dark pixel because no light can go through. On the other hand, if this one is fixed, it is horizontal, but you also program the other one to be horizontal, then you have the most amount of light passing through because you only lose about 1/2 of the light because of each layer of polarization. So there are multiple layers. I think with modern LCDs, the number of layers is insane. It's like 18 layers or something like that. Okay. The bottom line is, when you see a white pixel, you're only seeing 10% of the actual light produced from the backlight. That is the inefficiency of your film right there. Okay, because when you see an entire white screen, you're only seeing 10% of the actual backlight. So that's why. I mean, that is the reason why it is so inefficient. If you use e-ink technology on cell phone, do you guys know what is e-ink? E-I-N-K?
Mm-hmm.
E-ink is interesting. You basically have a lot of tiny little spheres where half the sphere is black and the other half is white. So by controlling the polarity, they can basically rotate each ball up or down, and that controls the whether a pixel is dark or white. But it's based on reflective technology. And that's why Kindles, the original black and white Kindles, that's why one charge can last a whole week with people reading books on the Kindle all day long. Because once you configure the spheres, it takes no energy to maintain the picture. Like 0. Whereas in this case, you need constant backlight, and you're losing a lot of energy because of the layers in between.
So a Kindle doesn't have a backlight? Kindles don't have backlights?
The new Kindles have, they are lit, but I think they're lit from the side, but not they're not from behind. Because the e-ink technology cannot be lit from behind; it can only be lit from the top or side. Right. So we are almost running out of time because of all the digression. But we do have the next topic to talk about. Can anyone guess what is going to be the next topic as far as this class is concerned? We're done with push and pop. What is the? Sorry?
Q in, Q out.
You mean first in, first out?
Yeah.
No, not exactly. We're going to go back to this topic, calling and returning, function calls and function returning. Why do you think this has anything to do with the stack when you look at function call, return, and stuff like that? Yep.
Parameters go on and off the stack and return them.
Okay, that's one. But when you think about the ordering of calling and returning, what does that remind you? Okay, main calls A calls B calls C, C calls D. When D is done, where does it go back to?
Back to C.
It back to C and not back to main. Okay, so it goes back to C, and when C is done, it goes back to B, B goes to A goes back to main. How does that have anything to do with stacks?
Just like
The
this.
ordering of putting things in and retrieving things. How do we call it again? Last in, first out. Okay?
First in.
It's last in, first out. The last function that you call is the one that you return from first. Right? So it is last in, first out. And that is why we talk about the stack. That's why we talk about the push and the pop instruction. There are specific instructions for calling and returning. Okay, so these are subroutines, general concept. I'm not going to talk about that because we should know that already. Oops. Back. And okay. So when you call a subroutine in assembly, it really is just the word call, okay, as the name of the instruction, and then the label for the subroutine as the only thing you have to supply or specify. When you want to return, it's just RET to basically indicate it's time for this subroutine to return. We'll talk about this on Thursday, so you might want to read this ahead of time. Okay, it will be beneficial to read this ahead of time. But when we do this, I will do it in several ways. I will go through a trace in GDB. We'll examine the stack order. We'll examine the stack and stuff like that. And we'll also try to implement the call instruction and the return instruction using a Risc style, which means we're not going to use the call and return instructions. Instead, we'll use more basic instructions to do exactly the same thing. So we'll do all of that on Thursday, and you do have your homework assignment due on Thursday as well. So don't forget that. I'm going to conclude the lecture at this point, but I will be at the lab in case you want to work on the homework assignment or have questions.